how could I be stuck in a relationship where I was being effectively psychologically abused when I'm an intelligent, successful, professional woman on the outside? It just cracked me open. I want to open up a bit today and tell you a little bit about, my failures around love. I like to be as transparent as I can, and I think it's really important for you guys that follow me here to know that, I've come to knowledge from failure. Failure is how we grow and learn. And today's talk is pretty much just about the ways that I failed at love. And the reason I want to open up and tell you about them is that if I can just stop one of you from making the mistakes I've had, then, my job is done. That is the heart and the core of why I teach what I do and work with clients in the way that I do, because I've lived this. It's been the most painful journey and lessons I've ever had, and it is my life's work. So I want to share the ways I've failed at love today, and I'll probably at the end go into, how I've turned it around. We'll see. But just a bit of backstory. So I come from having a very anxious attachment style, for those of you that know what that is. If you don't, just a very anxious young girl, and very focused in my coping strategies to connect, in relationship. Like, that was my refuge. That was how I sought to soothe what was going on internally. Right? I was constantly needing connection and going from relationship to relationship. And, I'd call myself a recovering serial monogamist because relationship was such a part of my, unconscious survival strategy and soothing strategy. I hadn't come into relationship internally with myself and really done the work that I teach a lot about here on this channel. But what I found in my past, looking back now, is that, I kept on going from relationship to relationship, and the partners that I was kind of being drawn to, they tended to produce more of an activation, more anxiety in my body than the previous. I wasn't intentionally seeking partners that were more chaotic and dramatic than the last, but it just happened to be that was the pattern. My relationships got more chaotic. They produced more anxiety, more, this sense that I must kind of like keep the connection in no matter what, until it really hit a tipping point with one particular relationship that I had. And if you watched my webinar, which is in the link below, you'll know the full story, and I really encourage you to go there because I tell everything on that. This tipping point that I got to, where I actually was in an emotionally abusive relationship. It was long distance. It wasn't physically abusive, but abuse is abuse. And I needed therapy to get out of that relationship. And for all of my life, I'd been in this incredible cycle that had just been going and going and going and gaining more momentum and strength and overwhelming my life, taking over my life, until I got to this point where it was like a massive smack in my face. How could I be stuck in a relationship where I was being effectively psychologically abused when I'm an intelligent, successful, professional woman on the outside? It just cracked me open, and I had nowhere to go other than to look at what was going on inside of me. And this brings me to my failure, my awareness of my failure at this point, because this is where my healing finally began, when I became aware of what was going on. And the failure in this moment that just shocked me, like it really like took the rug right out from my feet and caused me to question my entire life, was the realization that in this momentum, in this cycle, I had been constantly self-abandoning. I'd been abandoning every part of myself in every year, in every relationship, in every pursuit of the next person to get that connection, because that connection was more important to me biologically. The way that I'd developed my nervous system was coping with internal stresses. that was more important than sitting back and actually dealing with what was going on. That level of self-abandonment was shocking. But I know that that isn't unusual. And let me know in the comments below if you resonate with self-abandonment, if you're aware of that as a pattern of yours in relationships. People do it in other forms, any kind of other addiction, drug, alcohol. And I would have called myself then, when I realized it, a love addict. In fact, when I read a lot of the material, I really aligned with it. But because I'd become aware of it and started to cognitize, whatever that word is, to understand it, to unpack it, it started to have less control over me, right? The more light I shone in there, the more power I started to gain over the patterns. It didn't happen straight away. But had I not actually done that, to that point, like, this is a question I ask myself frequently. Had it not been that bad, would I have woken up and healed? And is part of the reason why I'm here on YouTube teaching and talking and helping clients and getting the message out there, because I don't want you to have to go through that. I don't want you to have to suffer to that extreme point where you crack inside and you question your life and your morality and everything in order to heal. Because I don't believe that you need to do that. It's just awareness. It's simple information and self-reflection, and that skill. So that was why I was failing at love. This cycle of self-abandonment, right? And it when you look at attachment theory, it makes sense, because I was self-soothing by being with others, by being with men, my chosen gender, but it starts from very early on when you're trying to get connection with your parents. And if you're not able to get the connection you need in that moment, and it doesn't happen frequently enough, it turns into a cycle of codependency and enmeshment, because you're constantly trying to get that connection going, and that translates into your adult relationships, right? And that is effectively self-abandonment. Now, like, if you look at the data of attachment theory, I don't know what the percentage is, but half, 50% it seems, ish, of people that then have secure attachment seem to mature and let go of that kind of childish need to, get connection at all costs. And they mature into their identity, and they start to feel that strong connection within themselves. Now, I didn't naturally do that until this moment happened that I spoke about. And I constantly am very fascinated about the parts of that, what actually happens for people that are securely attached that doesn't happen for those that are insecurely attached. But it really seems to boil down to this kind of maturing process of letting go of these ways and allowing the body to be more self-sufficient, like biologically, to be able to soothe in the self, because it is a soothing mechanism. And why are we soothing? Because we don't feel good enough. We can't be alone. We don't feel worthy. And why do we feel that? Because we got these messages when we were in childhood from our family, from our friends, from wherever it came from, and we internalize and personalize that. Particularly if you're a very sensitive person, you are, there's a higher chance that you're going to be having this kind of insecure attachment, or having these tendencies to self-abandon then in your adult relationships. So what I wanted to talk to you about around that, as a bit of a takeaway as well for you guys, because I wasn't here just to talk about myself. I just wanted to open up and show you a little bit more, of my process. But really, the reason I'm talking about this failure of self-abandonment that is so common, let's just normalize it right now. I mean, you see it everywhere. And it's not all bad. It's fun to have a drink sometimes, right? But it's not good if it's causing you constant pain over 20 years of your life. The reason I want to talk about that is because there is another component as equally important that was also a failure of mine that I now understand more fully and teach as well, is a kind of a puzzle piece. It fits in perfectly with self-abandonment. And that other puzzle piece is having a lack of self-trust. not having trust in self, in what is going on inside. And it makes perfect sense, because if you've been overriding your sense of self in order to get connection for years, decades, of course you're not going to have a secure sense of self, because it just hasn't had time to develop yet. It hasn't had your attention, your space, your time, right? Because you've been in this other mode. It's like this switch has been flicked on for you to get connection from others at the sake of, abandoning what's actually going on inside of you. And so therefore you don't trust what's going on inside of you, because you're constantly overriding it, because the connection is more important. So what this important puzzle piece, when you realize the self-abandonment tendency that you have, and if you're on this channel, chances are you do tend to self-abandon in love and relationships. The other important part is self-trust. And self-trust is something we can tangibly create, which is why it's very empowering to realize now. If you're realizing right now that you do not have trust in yourself, I want to congratulate you, because that awareness is your first step. We can create trust within ourselves. It is a skill that we develop, and people that have secure attachment naturally developed it through their maturing process. And we just need some help to do that. We just need to create some processes in our life and commit to it, a bit like learning how to ride a bike or learning a new language. It is learning a new language. It's learning the language of what's actually going on inside of you. You're learning your language. What are your needs? What are your emotions? What's truly going on inside right now, as opposed to being over attuned to everyone else around you and trying to please everyone. Right? So self-trust, if we look at it from that linguistic perspective, we're coming into relationship internally with ourselves. And that is the very, very balm that will soothe the self-abandonment. So I want to offer you guys some help, something, because you've listened, and I've probably opened up a couple of little Pandora's boxes for you, and I want to let you in on my process around creating self-trust. And most of what I do and teach really comes down to empowering my clients to do that for themselves. I'm very much of the adage that you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. You teach him how to fish, he eats for life. So I'm gonna teach you from that perspective about how to cultivate self-trust within you, rather than giving you kind of slap-on tactics or lists or whatever. So for me personally, the first thing was really coming to be super honest with what was going on inside of me when I was cracked open and could see the level of self-abandonment. That was the greatest pain I've ever experienced in my life. Like acknowledging that. And damn, that's hard, right? Because you've got to be honest to a level that you've never been. And you've been so dishonest in that sense before, because you've been pushing it down. So just think right now in yourself, what have I said that's really rung true for you? And if you can be really honest, to just write like 3 points right now, press pause if you want, of things that you're doing in this kind of self-abandonment cycle. Write them down and just sit with them. It's painful and difficult. But this is the first step of self-trust, is actually acknowledging what's going on, right? And the next part of the self-trust process is that I did, that worked for me, that I teach, that works for my clients, is to allow it to be, is to not make it wrong, to not shame it, right? We've been ignoring things and shaming this part of ourselves our whole life. So if we keep doing what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. We've got to do the opposite. We've got to actually allow it and have some compassion for that. And a great way to do that is to acknowledge that the first time you started doing this as a young child, it was actually a coping mechanism that allowed you to feel safe where you were actually feeling unsafe with your primary caregivers. It actually allowed you to develop as a child. It's a very intelligent mechanism at play here. Okay, it just needs to be matured. It needs to have have a shift, which is what we're working towards. But we can't shame the thing that kept us safe when we were young, when we didn't have the internal resources and the internal maturity to deal with parents that weren't showing up, or, you know, divorcing, or whatever your origin story is. So really recognizing the truth and allowing it and respecting it and being grateful for it. If you do any inner child work, that part of you, that little girl, needs you to hear that, because she was damn smart back then. She was doing that to keep us safe. If we keep shaming her, we'll keep it in play. All right, so allowing it. This is part of my origin. This is where I've come from. This was an intelligent part of me, and I honor that. All right. So that was the second kind of aspect around self-trust. The third aspect, the third step that I kind of did, was to then kind of look at how it's then played out in my adult life, and to get curious about it, not from shame, just to look at, okay, so you self-abandon, you're trying to get connection, and what are the kinds of stories I tell myself about it? And they're limiting beliefs, if you understand that terminology. They're things like, I always have to perform violin to get love. Like I trained as a musician, and performing music was always a vehicle for me to get, validation from my family and from, people in the world. And so looking at what your patterns are and really getting curious as to how they've played out, because they have played out in lots of different ways. This is where you've got to be a scientist with yourself and just draw the thread back. Look at where it is in your life now and just draw the thread back. And you can go back, and most of the time they just originated in a couple of core wounds, performing because you didn't feel worthy of love, or chasing because you didn't want to be abandoned. There's just a couple of core wounds at the core of how you now play out your self-abandonment story in your day-to-day life and in your relationships specifically. So investigating them and really getting curious around that, and then knowing that you've kind of got this alter ego, or I call it the false self, that in your day-to-day adult life still doesn't feel safe. Like you still don't feel safe with people in relationships. You're still that little 3-year-old, like really in pain. That person, that child is still with you, right? And I use the word false because it doesn't come from an authentic place. It doesn't come from a place where we're acting from an empowered, expanded, the real nature of who we are. It's coming from fear, right? Any kind of false patterning and behavior is coming from fear. And, the work that I do with my clients helps us to identify in the body whether we are coming from fear or whether we are coming from authenticity. And you notice my body changed because our bodies are really freaking smart. They know the difference. If you learn how to come into a relationship more closely with your body, which is why this kind of somatic work is so important, you will be able to be onto this alter ego more frequently. And of course, self-trust, just to circle back to the point I was making about how to build it, comes down to, knowing, being aware and allowing and getting curious about how it comes out, and then acting more frequently from a place of authenticity and what is really you, rather than acting from fear. Because every time we act from fear, we're harming ourselves, right? Because we're trying to get something that we think we need to feel safe, and it just isn't true. It's not who we are. We are safe right now in this body. We're breathing. Our bodies give us everything we need right now. So building self-trust is this act of putting in presence and showing up as our most authentic self more times than when we operate from fear. But we can never not operate from fear, because it is a part of our patterning. It's a part of our biology and our origin We are going to operate from fear sometimes. But trust is built when there's a tipping point that we can rely on ourselves enough in our knowledge of our body that we've got our own back, right? We know we're onto our patterns. We know we shouldn't do something, and then we don't do it more often than not. And then when we do it, we're compassionate with ourselves. It's not a regression. What I notice is when I go back into old habits, I've got new awareness over it, and I'm like, wow, that was really painful. That's why I don't want to do this again. Thanks for that lesson. Then we get back into acting more frequently from our authentic self. So I'm hoping that this video is helpful, me sharing with you my failures and opening up on this process around self-trust. But like I said, if you want to know more about my story and more about what I teach, the webinar link, the Proven 3 Steps to a Secure Relationship's got all that information. So you can just click the link below and join me there. And if you're new to this channel and you want to hear more stuff like this, just click the subscribe button, click the like button, because that'll help, help this channel out in the algorithm. And here are some videos that you might want to watch to keep learning about this process. They're all very interlinked. And for now, I will see you in the next video.